Somewhere in the city of Shenzhen, China, inside a building that looks unremarkable from the outside, a machine is running right now that no single human being can fully comprehend. Not because it is classified, not because it is hidden, but because the scale of what it does every second of every day is simply beyond what the human mind was built to process. 2 quintillion calculations per second, not 2,000, not 2 million, not 2 billion, 2 quintillion. That is a 2 followed by 18 zeros. And it never stops. It does not sleep. It does not tire. It does not pause to wonder what it is doing or why. It simply computes endlessly at a speed so vast that if you tried to count its operations aloud at a rate of 1 per second, you would need more time than the universe has existed to finish counting a single second of its work. This machine is called LineShine, and in June 2026, it was officially declared the most powerful supercomputer on Earth. But that is not the most disturbing part of this story. The most disturbing part is what comes next. Because LineShine is not the end of something. Scientists, engineers, and researchers who have spent their careers studying these machines will tell you quietly and with a certain gravity in their voices that LineShine is only the beginning, a checkpoint, a waypoint on a trajectory that ends somewhere nobody has fully mapped out. A trajectory that points toward machines so powerful they could simulate entire worlds, decode the chemistry of life itself, model the behavior of every atom in a human brain, and, according to some of the most sober voices in science, potentially think. This is the story of a supercomputer beyond human imagination, and it is a story that has already begun. To understand what LineShine represents, you have to go back. Not far, just a few decades. Because in the span of time it takes for a child to grow into an adult, the entire landscape of computing has been transformed beyond recognition. In 1993, a group of computer scientists named Erich Strohmeyer and Hans Moyer sat down before a conference and asked a simple question. Which computers on Earth are the most powerful? They compiled a list, 500 machines ranked by performance. They called it the Top 500. It was, at the time, a relatively modest catalog of machines that filled large rooms and performed tasks that today would be considered trivially simple. The fastest system on that first list operated at a speed measured in gigaflops, billions of operations per second. Impressive for the era, laughably slow by what was coming. That list has been updated twice every year since, and what it documents is one of the most relentless technological accelerations in human history. Within a decade, the speeds measured in gigaflops gave way to teraflops, trillions of operations per second. Then came petaflops, quadrillions. For years, the petaflop barrier seemed like an almost mythological threshold. Researchers spoke about it in hushed, reverential tones. When Japan's Fugaku supercomputer demonstrated it, when America's Oak Ridge National Laboratory crossed it, the scientific world took notice, but nobody stopped. Then came the word that changed everything. Exaflop. 1 exaflop. 1 quintillion floating point operations per second, the kind of number that makes physicists pause and reach for better analogies. Experts at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California spent years building toward it. In November 2024, their machine, a behemoth called El Capitan, crossed the threshold and was verified at 1809 exaflops. It was declared the world's fastest supercomputer. The Department of Energy called it a triumph of American science. The researchers who built it, the engineers who wired its 11 million cores together, the physicists who had dreamed of it for 20 years, they allowed themselves a moment of pride. That moment lasted less than 2 years, because researchers weren't prepared for what happened next. In the spring of 2026, word began to circulate quietly through the international supercomputing community. China was submitting a new entry to the top 500 list, not an update to an existing system. Something new, something that had not appeared on any previous list, something that had been built in secret and benchmarked in silence and was now, without fanfare or announcement, being presented to the global scientific community as a fait accompli. On June 23, 2026, at the ISC High Performance Conference in Hamburg, Germany, the 67th edition of the Top 500 list was released. And there it was, at position number 1, LineShine, installed at the National Supercomputing Center in Shenzhen, built by the Shenzhen Cloud Computing Center. Performance verified at 198 exaflops, the first machine in the history of computing to sustain more than 2 exaflops of double precision performance, more than 20% faster than El Capitan, a Chinese machine at the top of the world. Jack Dongara, emeritus professor of computer science at the University of Tennessee and one of the founding organizers of the Top 500 list, said he was not entirely surprised. He had watched China's trajectory for years, but he acknowledged that the achievement carried weight far beyond a simple ranking. Export controls, he noted, may slow a nation's access to certain advanced components, but they also provide a powerful incentive to build domestic alternatives. And that, in ways the architects of those controls may not have anticipated, is precisely what appears to have happened. But this is where the story becomes truly strange, because LineShine is not what you might expect. It is not built the way the other fastest machines in the world are built. It does not rely on the GPU accelerators that power most of the cutting-edge systems in the United States and Europe. It has no NVIDIA chips, no AMD accelerators, no foreign components of any kind. Instead, it runs entirely on central processing units, custom-built Chinese processors called LX2, each with 304 cores, running at 55 gigahertz, linked together by a proprietary Chinese interconnect called Lingqi, on a Chinese operating system called Keilin, 13,789,440 cores working in concert. The name LineShine is a translation of the Chinese characters Lingsheng, meaning roughly intelligent splendor, or intelligent brightness. The name was not chosen casually. To truly grasp what a machine like this can do, you have to let go of ordinary scales of comparison. You have to leave the world of human intuition behind entirely. Because the calculations LineShine performs in a single second have no analog in natural experience, there is nothing in the physical world, no waterfall, no wind, no geological force, that operates at the scale of 2 quintillion events per second. Consider what scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory have used their Exascale machine El Capitan for. They have performed the largest and fastest protein structure prediction workflow ever attempted, using the system's full power to predict how billions of different protein assemblies behave. A single protein can fold in more ways than there are atoms in the observable universe. The mathematics of that folding, the quantum mechanical forces, the electrostatic interactions, the thermodynamic landscapes, would defeat any human calculator in seconds. El Capitan does it at industrial scale. Researchers from Columbia University, working with the LLNL team, called it a milestone in biological computing, a step toward unlocking new understandings of disease, drug discovery, and the fundamental architecture of life itself. El Capitan has been used to simulate the detonation of nuclear weapons without detonating them, running virtual tests of America's aging nuclear stockpile to ensure reliability without the need for physical explosions. It has modeled turbulent fluid dynamics at scales previously considered computationally out of reach. It won a Gordon Bell Prize in 2025 for running a real-time tsunami early warning framework, a simulation so detailed and so fast that it could, in principle, give coastal populations minutes of additional warning before a wave arrives. And LineShine, by the benchmarks that matter for traditional scientific computing, is more powerful still. On the HPC-G benchmark, which tests the kind of memory-intensive, data-heavy calculations closest to real-world scientific workloads, it registered 22 petaflops, compared to El Capitan's 41. It is built for the tasks that matter most to physical scientists: climate simulation, molecular dynamics, material science, nuclear modeling. The combined total computing power of all 500 machines on the June 2026 top 500 list reached 74 exaflops, a 25% increase in just 6 months. The world's supercomputing capacity is growing faster than almost anyone predicted. But even that number hides something unsettling, because the machines that are doing the heaviest lifting in the most consequential domain of modern technology, artificial intelligence, are not on this list at all. Here's what most people don't know, and this is where things get genuinely disturbing. The top 500 list measures scientific supercomputers, machines built and operated primarily by national laboratories, universities, government agencies, and research institutions. Machines whose owners submit their benchmark scores for independent verification. Transparent machines, in a sense, built for science that benefits humanity broadly. But there is another class of machine now, private AI clusters, owned by corporations, operating at scales that rival or exceed anything on the official rankings. Researchers Konstantin Pilz, James Sanders, Roby Raman, and Leonard Heim concluded in an independent analysis that xAI's Colossus cluster, a machine operated by Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company located in Memphis, Tennessee, had likely already surpassed El Capitan in raw computing power well before the June 2026 list was published. Colossus was never submitted to the top 500. It is not ranked. It is not independently verified. It simply exists in a vast building in Tennessee, consuming electricity at a scale that strains the local power grid, running AI workloads around the clock. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta. These are not research institutions. They are corporations, and the AI infrastructure they operate is measured in scales that dwarf any government supercomputer. They could claim the top spots on the top 500, experts noted at the Hamburg conference, if they chose to submit. They do not choose to. Their machines are not built for the benchmarks science uses to measure itself. They are built for something else entirely, and this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Because the machines that matter most for what is coming, The machines that are actually training the AI systems shaping medicine, finance, science, military strategy, and the information environment billions of people live in are operating outside the systems of public accountability that the scientific community built. They are private, unranked, largely unseen. The question of what comes after LineShine has been occupying researchers for years, and the answer they keep arriving at is simultaneously thrilling and deeply unsettling. Exascale is no longer a frontier. It is, as one researcher noted, the new normal. The next frontier has a name, Exascale. A zetaflop is 1,000 exaflops. It is 10 to the power of 21 floating point operations per second. Japan's government has allocated the equivalent of $761 million toward building a zetascale successor to Fugaku, a machine they call Fugaku Next, with a target date of around 2030. AMD's CEO has spoken publicly about reaching zetaflop performance in the 2030 to 2035 timeframe, though estimates of what that would require in terms of electrical power are staggering. Some projections suggest a single zetaflop machine would need close to 500 megawatts of power, roughly the output of a medium-sized nuclear power plant, dedicated entirely to feeding one computer. Chinese scientists, back in 2018, predicted that the first zetascale system would be assembled by 2035. Given the pace of LineShine's emergence, appearing fully formed on the top 500 with no prior public disclosure, some researchers now wonder whether that timeline might also arrive without warning. And here is what zetascale performance could mean, concretely, for science. A simulation of a supernova core collapse, the kind of 3D model of shockwave instability that takes 1 million hours on petaflop machines and 1,000 hours on exaflop systems, could be completed in a single hour on a zetaflop computer. Weather prediction models accurate to 2 weeks globally. Molecular dynamics, simulations of entire biological organisms, materials discovery at scales that could compress decades of chemistry into weeks. But the most profound implication, the one that keeps certain researchers awake at night, is what zetascale computing might mean for the simulation of the human brain itself. Researchers weren't prepared to discuss this openly for many years. The question felt too speculative, too close to science fiction. But the science has been catching up to the speculation with uncomfortable speed. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each neuron forms thousands of synaptic connections with other neurons. The electrical and chemical dynamics of the brain operate across multiple scales simultaneously: molecular, cellular, regional, whole brain, with interactions so complex that our best current models capture only the roughest approximations. Researchers at the Frontiers Journal of Systems Neuroscience have noted that emulating the full brain may require not just zetascale computing, but yotta-scale, 10 to the power of 24 operations per second, which would not arrive until around 2040 at projected rates of progress. But even a partial simulation, even capturing the dynamics of a significant fraction of the brain's activity at biological detail, would constitute one of the most significant events in human history, not because it would answer every question about consciousness, but because it would allow scientists to test hypotheses about the brain that are currently untestable, to run virtual experiments on neurological conditions, to understand at a mechanistic level what happens in the mind during learning, during memory formation, during the cascade of failures that produce Alzheimer's disease, schizophrenia, or depression. Ray Kurzweil, the futurist and inventor who joined Google as a director of engineering and spent decades tracking the exponential growth of computing, predicted as far back as 2005 that human-level artificial intelligence would arrive around 2029. He reaffirmed that prediction in 2024. Werner Vinge, writing in 1993, predicted the attainment of greater than human intelligence between 2005 and 2030. The Wikipedia entry on the technological singularity notes that a September 2025 review of surveys of scientists and industry experts found that most agreed artificial general intelligence, a machine that can perform any intellectual task a human can perform, would occur within the coming decades. These are not fringe voices. These are researchers working from trend lines. And the trend lines, right now, point upward at a slope that is not significantly flattened. There is a geopolitical dimension to all of this that is equally impossible to ignore, and it changes the stakes of the story in ways that go well beyond academic interest. The Stanford University AI Index report, released in April 2026, found that China had effectively closed the artificial intelligence model performance gap with the United States. The US still produces more frontier AI models, but China holds the advantage in patent filings and industrial AI deployment. And now, with LineShine sitting at the top of the top 500, China has demonstrated something that no export control could fully prevent: the ability to build exascale computing infrastructure using entirely domestic technology. This is the part of the story that experts at the Hamburg conference spoke about most carefully. The export controls the United States has imposed on advanced semiconductors, Restrictions designed to slow China's access to the GPU accelerators most useful for training large AI models have unquestionably had an effect. LineShine placed only 4th on the HPL NMXP benchmark, the test that most closely approximates AI training workloads. 3 American systems, all running GPU accelerators China cannot currently obtain, outperformed it on that specific measure. The controls are working at the margin that matters for frontier AI, but they have also done something else. They have incentivized 9 years of intensive domestic chip development. They have driven the creation of an entirely sovereign computing stack, processors, interconnects, storage, operating system, that owes nothing to foreign suppliers and cannot be disrupted by foreign policy. And they have produced a machine that, on the metrics that govern traditional scientific computing, is the fastest on Earth. Addison Snell, co-founder of Intersect 360 Research and a leading analyst of the supercomputing industry, said at the conference that the ranking of LineShine should have a ripple effect across the United States, Europe, and Japan as nations continue to compete for technological dominance. The US still leads globally, he said, but the gap is not wide. And with the rapid pace of evolution, the global order could change quickly. What those words conceal is the deeper question neither governments nor corporations can answer cleanly. Who controls the most powerful computers on Earth controls something far more significant than a ranking on a biannual list. They control the capacity to simulate, to predict, to model, to discover. They control the frontier of what is knowable, and the frontier of what is knowable is the frontier of power. This has always been true. The nations that could build the best telescopes reshaped astronomy. The nations that could build the best accelerators reshaped physics. The institutions that could afford the most powerful computers have, for decades, led every scientifically consequential field from climate science to nuclear weapons design to genomics. The difference now is one of scale. The advantage conferred by a machine like LineShine or El Capitan or the private AI clusters operating outside any public ranking is not merely incremental. It is, in certain domains, total. A nation that can simulate molecular interactions at exascale can design drugs its rivals cannot. A military that can model nuclear warhead behavior in virtual space can maintain deterrence without live testing. An intelligence apparatus that can run climate models at unprecedented resolution understands the geopolitical pressures of the next 30 years before they materialize into conflict. These are not hypothetical applications. They are the stated purposes of the machines already running. And the countries building the next generation are doing so with exactly this understanding in mind. But the real mystery had only just begun, because even as LineShine claimed its crown, a parallel development was unfolding in laboratories that most people will never visit, in scientific papers that most people will never read. Quantum computing, a fundamentally different paradigm that exploits the strange physics of quantum. Superposition and entanglement to perform certain calculations in ways that classical computers cannot match has been edging closer to practical utility. On June 23, 2026, a French company called Quintillion, presenting at the same Hamburg conference where LineShine debuted, announced it had experimentally validated a new quantum photonic architecture. The US Department of Energy, on the same day, announced an initiative to create and deploy scientifically relevant, fault-tolerant quantum computers. Quantum Computing Inc., Darcyern on the same day, completed an acquisition designed to accelerate quantum semiconductor development. This convergence was not accidental. Researchers at the frontier of computing understand that classical and quantum architectures are not competing. They are complementary. El Capitan at Lawrence Livermore has already been used to explore hybrid classical quantum algorithm development for next-generation magnets. The machines being designed now are intended to weave classical supercomputing and quantum processing into a single unified infrastructure, each handling the problems it is best suited for, together exceeding what either could achieve alone. Some researchers speak about this convergence with barely concealed excitement. Others speak about it with a kind of quiet apprehension. Because the kinds of problems that such a combined system could solve, problems in cryptography, in material science, in pharmaceutical discovery, in climate modeling, in nuclear physics, are not just scientifically interesting, they are strategically decisive. They are the kinds of problems that shape the balance of power between nations, the outcomes of medical crises, the structure of economies. A machine that could simultaneously run quantum algorithms and exascale simulations, processing molecular dynamics at the quantum level while tracking macroscopic phenomena at the classical level, would be something genuinely new in the history of technology. Not just a faster computer, something qualitatively different, something whose implications we do not yet fully have the vocabulary to describe. There is a conversation that happens among the physicists and computer scientists who work on these systems, a conversation that rarely makes it into press releases or congressional briefings. It concerns a threshold that nobody can precisely define, but almost everyone who works in the field believes is approaching. the threshold at which the machines stop being tools and start being participants, the threshold at which the complexity of the computation becomes, in some meaningful sense, indistinguishable from thought. Alan Turing, writing in 1950, asked whether a machine could exhibit intelligent behavior, equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. His question was philosophical, nearly metaphysical in its implications, but it was also, at its core, a question about computation, about whether the substrate mattered, about whether intelligence was something you could count in floating point operations per second, or whether it was something else entirely, something that emerged from the particular architecture of biological neurons in ways no silicon machine could replicate. 75 years later, that question is no longer purely philosophical. It is engineering, and the engineers are moving fast. A University of Toronto researcher published a paper arguing mathematically that Turing machines cannot fully simulate the human mind, that quantum effects in the human brain are fundamental to its cognitive abilities, and that classical computers, no matter how fast, cannot capture them. This view is controversial. Many researchers reject it, but it points at something important. We do not yet know where the boundary is between computation and cognition. We do not know whether the thing that makes human thought uniquely human is something a sufficiently powerful machine could reproduce, or something irreducibly biological. What we do know is that the machines are getting faster, much faster. And the more powerful they become, the more clearly we see how much of what we once thought required human intelligence actually does not. Protein folding, weather prediction, nuclear weapons simulation, drug discovery, astrophysical modeling, climate science. These were once considered among the most intractable problems in applied mathematics, problems that the best human minds had worked on for decades without cracking. One by one, supercomputers have absorbed them, not metaphorically, literally absorbed them, taken problems that would take a human calculator millions of years to solve and rendered answers in hours. The protein folding problem alone, understanding how a sequence of amino acids folds into the three-dimensional structure that determines its biological function, was described by researchers as biology's equivalent of climbing Everest blindfolded. A single protein can fold in more ways than there are atoms in the observable universe. The mathematics defeated human intuition completely. AI systems running on supercomputer infrastructure have now solved it at scale, predicting the structures of hundreds of millions of proteins, opening doors in medicine and biotechnology that were firmly locked for generations. And this is just the beginning of what the current generation of machines can do. Researchers at Lawrence Livermore published a paper in 2025 about using El Capitan to run the largest fluid dynamics simulation ever performed, a calculation of such scope and detail that it required the full power of the world's then fastest machine. They won a computing prize for building a real-time tsunami warning system, whose simulations run fast enough to outpace the wave itself. The question is not what these machines can do. The question is what the next generation can do, and the generation after that. Here is the number that puts everything in perspective, and it is a number that should stay with you. The combined computing power of all 500 machines on the current top 500 list is 74 exaflops, all 500 of them together. The human brain, your brain running right now, processes information at a rate that neuroscientists estimate at somewhere between 1 and 100 exaflops, depending on how you define and measure the comparison. By some estimates, the most powerful biological computing system that evolution has ever produced is already being approached, crudely, imperfectly, at enormous cost in electricity and cooling, by the aggregate of the world's 500 most powerful machines working together. By the time the first zettaflop machine is built, and most serious researchers believe it will be built within this decade or the next, the gap between machine and biological computation will be closing in ways that are not merely quantitative. They will be qualitative. The simulations will be more detailed, more faithful, more complete. The models will predict things that no human could predict. The discoveries will come from experiments that no human designed, confirming hypotheses that no human formulated. Scientists at institutions from MIT to Stanford to Oxford have been cautious about how they frame this trajectory. Nobody wants to be the researcher who overpromised. Nobody wants to attach their name to a prediction that history makes look naive. But in private, in conversations at the margins of conferences like the one in Hamburg where LineShine debuted, the scientists who build these systems say things that don't always make it into journal papers. They say that we are approaching something, that the trajectory is clear even if the destination is not, that the machines are becoming something we do not yet have the right words to describe. And here is perhaps the most profound implication of all, the one that circles back to the beginning of this story, to that unremarkable building in Shenzhen where 2 quintillion calculations happen every second. We built these machines, human beings, with human hands and human minds and human ambitions and human fears. We built them to solve our problems, to answer our questions, to extend what was possible. And for a long time, that framing was sufficient. The machines were our tools. Very large, very fast, very expensive tools, but tools. What LineShine represents, what the entire trajectory from gigaflops to teraflops to petaflops to exaflops represents, is a question that the tools are beginning to ask back. Not in words. Not yet, perhaps not ever, in any way that would satisfy a philosopher, but in the sense that the problems the machines are now solving are problems that the machines themselves are helping to define. The research directions being pursued, the hypotheses being generated, the discoveries that are being made, not because a human scientist designed the experiment, but because a system running at Exascale found a pattern in a data set no human could have surveyed. The machines are changing what science is. And the question of what they will change next, of where the line is between a very powerful tool and something else, something harder to name, is the question that hangs over every conference, every benchmark announcement, every press release about the next fastest machine in the world. We are building something. We have been building it for decades, iteration by iteration, generation by generation, each new machine more powerful than the last, by margins that would have seemed impossible at the start. And the thing we are building has a shape we can barely see yet from where we are standing. There's an old thought experiment in philosophy called the ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of a ship one by one until none of the original wood remains, is it still the same ship? The question was never really about ships. It was about identity, about continuity, about the moment when change becomes transformation. We have been replacing the planks of computing, one generation at a time, for 80 years. Vacuum tubes became transistors. Transistors became integrated circuits. Circuits became chips. Chips became accelerators. Accelerators became exascale clusters. Each transition was, in isolation, comprehensible. Each step was built by human hands following human plans. And yet something is emerging from the accumulation of those steps that no single human planned or fully foresaw. A capability, a presence, a trajectory with its own momentum. LineShine processes 2 quintillion calculations per second. The next machine will do more. The machine after that will do more still. And somewhere along that curve, somewhere on that trajectory that scientists trace on graphs with logarithmic axes, where every decade brings a leap that dwarfs everything that came before, something will cross a threshold. We don't know what will be waiting on the other side. But we are building toward it, right now, at a speed that has no precedent in the history of human civilization. And the most honest thing anyone can say about what comes next is also the oldest thing science has ever said about the unknown. We are about to find out.